chipping in as you feel appropriate. You know, please don't hold back with getting your word in there. Don't let me do all the talking, in other words. I just want to give a quick introduction. This session is about talking to individuals and groups in the community, including, or probably especially, those that don't view climate action as a top priority. And I just want to start by referencing the report, and as its key findings and recommendations are very much about what we can do in our communities. So in the introduction, it refers to every action of every individual, and each community affects everyone else. And then throughout the report, the message of community comes up time and time again. In our choices, we can improve life, creating an inclusive and fair society for all, sharing resources and ensuring there is something for future generations, work locally to generate and deliver local solutions. Housing needs to be supplied with carbon-free heating systems supported by insulation and smart management and storage systems. Coordination between local authorities, householders, business and community welfare agencies is an essential component in all development towards the net zero target. Transport, as we've already heard from John Whitehead, is responsible for 37% of our area's direct carbon emissions, and as John said, that is very high. Public transport is extremely limited. An efficient public transport system, to me anyway, almost seems unimaginable in Shropshire, but it could transform our roads to make them safer for cycling and walking. We are stronger when we cooperate and work together. Community action takes different forms, and there are a large number of different starting places. Getting going is the key, and there is support available from South Shropshire Climate Action. So there are some of the key messages concerning community in our report. Now, today's workshop, what we're doing now, is based on 4 headings: starting a climate conversation, what incentives can we give people who aren't interested in climate action, what can we do to pique their interest, get them involved, who should we talk to, and putting ideas into action. At this stage, I'd also like to point out that we've got a couple of people in this group who I really hope will be prepared to speak. I'm looking at Barry here as one of them, and Alison.
Can I just say something? Yes, so yes, Barry, but Alan Whitehead hasn't arrived, so I thought that Barry's ideas might be very useful, but anyone who wants to put their hands up and say anything would be good. Can I just start this? The climate conversation that I mentioned in the plenary session is something that's available for community groups, basically to find out where people are initially. You know, what a small group might think as their main starting point, and it could be anything to actually just get them going on thinking about climate action. And I just wondered if there are any examples that anyone has from this group where they might think that, because I think it's useful to share information and knowledge about you know, what is important in particular communities, or how you think one might start. Has anyone got, I think we should make this a bit interactive for a few minutes. Do you think, Helen?
Definitely, yeah. So Tony, you've got your hand up.
Hello, everybody. We are involved in all the local groups across the area as GSX, Green Shropshire Exchange. So we've got Ludlow 21, Stretton Climate Care, Sustainable Bridgnorth, and then there's others in other parts of Shropshire and Telford. And we try to work on positive stories and positive actions. As the youth spoke out about how depressing the message tends to be, it puts people off. And I think what we found is that if you can talk to people that have their own interests, whether it's land and nature or it's transport, if you can engage them on that and talk about the positive solutions, you start to get somewhere. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Tony. Because what we're looking for are, if you like, from you, good examples of what floats the boat for a particular an individual or a group. You know, what makes them think, yeah, it's that self-interest element, isn't it? So anybody else got any ideas?
Oh, Barry, you're muted. You're muted. Barry, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Barry.
Hi. A starting point is always to get to know people, what people think is important, and if possible, we all learn in different ways, is to try and discover how people learn, so you can build trust with the individual, whatever the situation, whether it incorporates the environment or whether it incorporates any other aspect of life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So
can I just say something? I mean, one of the challenges is how to raise this with people who are really not tuned into it, you know, it's a real challenge. I mean, we've got Becky. Are you from the school in Cleobury?
No, I'm not from anywhere. I'm just a mum.
Oh, you're just just a mum. Yeah,
not just a mum.
Yeah.
But I have had a thought about BAME community. We're a very white group, I noticed on the thing, and I know that I think it was South Shropshire Youth Forum have done a Muslim had a Muslim youth group, because I know down in Craven Arms there is a Muslim community.
Absolutely, Becky. Yeah.
So I think it's really important to try and engage widely and everyone in our communities. So not just Craven Arms, obviously within other areas there will be BAME communities. So I think that would be a good idea. Mm-hmm. And then I also think about, I don't know if this is a bit contentious to say, but perhaps it's quite middle class, maybe, perception. And so maybe trying to engage people that aren't in that group as well.
Absolutely, Becky. That is such a key point. And if I could just say something about that, because part of my job is community engagement. And I can tell you now, ordinary people with all their preoccupations and their troubles, this is not an issue for them. So you've got to get to what is an issue for them. So it might be looking at what would help the local economy with apprenticeships or creating new jobs. It might be energy use, so that they are not having to pay so much to heat their homes. So you're appealing to what's in their pocket. The environment, that's often one that people who don't necessarily associate it with climate change, but they do really care. They care about the litter in the hedgerows, and that's often another good way of getting people interested in this subject. And just, you know, going back to what Becky was saying about working with South Shropshire Youth Forum, I know some of the work they're doing at the moment is getting young people out into the woodlands, so that you're getting people, not necessarily just young people, but people generally thinking about valuing woods as a space for well-being rather than just a cash crop. There's some of the things that we've been using to try and start our climate conversations. Does anyone want to add anything more to that? Tony, I can see you've got your hand up, and then Richard. Tony, you're still muted.
Sorry. Two things that I can add in reply to the BAME. There are the interfaith groups, and I know SCAP has considered contact with those, and I think it's also an issue in the Telford area. The other one is the Voluntary Community Sector Assembly, and that has a wide-reaching brief, but it does include the food poverty and the fuel poverty action that's going across South Shropshire.
Yeah.
So that does reach out to people not necessarily living in a nice big house with a nice big car outside.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Richard?
Sorry, Alison, go on.
No.
Richard, you wanted to make a point?
Well, I mean, I think Becky's actually got to the nub of the problem, because I've been volunteering a long time with work parties, with both here and overseas, and even this was in New Zealand. And over there, they have the same problem of attracting people from different neighbourhoods, areas, classes, backgrounds, and so on. It's predominantly middle class over there as well. And I think this is very, very important to try and get people from a whole host of different range of backgrounds into this sort of operation. And how it's done, I really don't know, because it's very hard. Unless, I think possibly there may be a way, actually, once people get involved with something, I think this is the major problem, getting them involved in the first place. Once they get involved, they get quite wrapped with it. And I think there was a scheme with offenders, getting them out into the open and sort of almost Duke of Edinburgh type of stuff, getting them involved with the outdoors. And that really seemed to galvanize them into activities like that. But it's getting over that initial threshold, I think, is very, very difficult. And I don't know, I'm only really an observer here, because I've had no background in getting people involved, but you've probably had a lot more experience in this, and I'm quite interested to know how it's done.
Well, we've got a few ideas. Alison, I'll just run through the ideas that we've got and then bring you in.
Yeah.
So we think saving money, as you mentioned in what you said at the beginning, Richard, we think saving money is one that has a large appeal, and also getting fitter. There's been clear links between obesity, COVID, and general ill health. So we're hoping the message of eating less meat and getting fitter is one that will appeal to a wider range of people. And I think, you know, just little local actions that are easy and fun to do, like litter picks or butterfly counts or whatever, is as you say, you know, a way of getting people hooked, because once they're hooked. And I think the other important thing that we feel is that people have got to trust and have a relationship with the person. And I think that's what Barry said at the beginning, you know, that you've really got to trust the person who's giving the message, because if you don't have trust in them, and this is why again we're so keen to engage young people, so that they're not just feeling that it's all these middle-aged, middle-class white people talking to them. We want peer groups, young people talking to young people. The other issue that we've thought about is where there's a particularly pressing local concern. So I don't know about what's happening in your part of Shropshire, but certainly for us here in Clun, where Alison and I live, the growth of these big broiler chicken sheds springing up all over the place, and what they do to our rivers and waterways has been quite an issue. So sorry, I'll stop talking now and bring Alison, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, but I everything that everyone said has been really interesting. I think that the local, what was I going to say? I think that the groups really need to start it themselves if possible, and for us to be able to give support where needed. I think that's the kind of key. So for example, if there was something to do with the local school, it would be great if, you know, the parents of the children actually had an action that they were interested in. I mean, at Clun School, for instance, they're looking at putting solar panels on the roof, and they're going to they've worked with Dave Green, and there looks as though there's a project there that might go forward. So that is a really good focus, and they probably have to raise some money to do that, and they certainly have to write a proposal. I don't know the details of it. So if they can own it, it will fly. But the trouble is that if things are imposed from above, through the Shropshire Council or through town councils, it's much more difficult for people to take them on board. So that's why this idea of a local focus and these climate conversations with local groups is sort of the thing that we've kind of honed in on, because we can't really see, it's just going to be same as usual, you know, sort of otherwise. So I think that's my main point. It's quite difficult because it means that you then you just have to concentrate on your own local area, or we could try to coordinate, but my focus is Clun, you know, at the moment, and working with the town council and encouraging the school. So I don't know what other people think about this, about that.
Well, Tony wanted to make a point. Tony.
Yeah.
I believe Bishop's Castle has got involved in the local college there, and one of the sort of big things that they were doing was getting the community involved in plastics. You know, it links in with the whole issue of fossil fuels and producing plastics, but the plastic waste that we have is a problem that does involve a large number of people, and using that as a way of engaging people.
Absolutely, and you're so right about the single-use plastic in Bishop's Castle. That was a campaign that got everybody, well, many people talking. Barry, can I bring you in? You had your hand up, Barry.
Yes, I would share what Alison's just said, but I would become even more fundamental. I think it all starts within your own family, particularly listening to your children and your grandchildren. And for those of us who are lucky enough to have children and grandchildren, let them take the lead and let us support them, because they are the best ambassadors. And I think all the other ideas which I've listened to are all worthy and worth supporting. But unless you are practicing what you preach within your own family first, then the next step is the wider education. But it's the children that become the role models.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I just want to say something about that, which is on a personal note. I mean, I have to say that I find that my own family, I've got 6 grandchildren, are not very tuned in, and that may be something that is my fault for not having. Yeah, you know, I do try, but I find that a lot of young people I meet aren't particularly tuned into this part, because they don't really learn about it at school. They, as you say, Barry, they should learn about it at home, but if it's not supported by school, then it's quite difficult. Rachel, working with Rachel, who spoke on the plenary, she said that when she was at school in Church Stretton, she never really was conscious of the climate crisis at all. And it was only when she went to university that the penny started to drop, and she started to get involved in other things. So it's a real issue that it isn't embedded in education. But I do take your point, Barry, about home. It's just, I think a lot of people just don't know what to do, and that we need to address that.
The best place at home is when family eats together, because there's so much going on around the family meal table that embraces climate and food and health and strength, that you don't have to force an education on the environment. You just talk about what's going on at the meal table. And if the meals are prepared well, and my wife is a a brilliant cook, then nobody's late for the meal table, and the television's on, and it's the way parents find out what's really going on from their children and their grandchildren. So it's a simple issue, but it's very powerful for our family.
It's a good point, Barry, and I'd like to say something about that, but I think, Richard, you had your hand up, so...
Yeah, well, all I was going to say was, unfortunately, we weren't lucky enough to have a family, but so we only hear a lot of information secondhand. But from what I've heard about taking this into schools and things like that, it just doesn't seem to work very well. Now, whether it's because it's sort of top down and saying you must pick up your litter on the way home, blah, 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 it doesn't seem to give a very positive outlook on litter itself. And if it could be a bit more positive in a way that you're improving the environment and let's get involved with this, perhaps you could do things in your own street and start a little neighborhood group of your own. Or I think one thing that might improve it is the bringing in of bounties on plastic bottles and cans, which might sort of then engage the community and young people a bit more. Actually, if they're getting some money out of collecting this stuff and taking it to a central depository, that they can get a little bit of cash back, you know, that's something to give them a bonus, and things like that, which are not just a sort of top down from teacher says this, oh, well, we're not doing what teacher says. You know, I'm only hearing this secondhand from other people with children, but that's the sort of story I've heard anyway. I don't know.
Right, that's, yeah, I can certainly remember getting my 3D back on glass bottles. Becky and then David, please.
Absolutely agree with starting within the family. I've been very honest that there's much more that I can do, and we have conversations within the family and things, but they are aware. And I do think particularly my eldest would get involved, you know, like the group that we've just seen, they're older young people, but I think she would get involved, but I don't see the school offering those kind of opportunities, and I don't see the connect between the community organisations and the school as much as what there could be. And I know that that wouldn't work for every young person. In fact, for some young people that would be off-putting, the message coming from school. But certainly for my children, where I do have the conversations, and you know, we are quite open and talk about climate action. I think if it came from school, then they would be more likely to take up those opportunities. My hope is that once she goes to secondary, my hope is that secondary do work very closely with organisations like yourselves, and that my daughter has those opportunities, especially as a young woman, to get involved in affecting change.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and actually brings us on to the next of our headings, which is who should we talk to? So clearly, you know, there's a need to talk to the people who are doing the educating. But I just want to bring David in first. David?
Yeah, quickly, I was going to say it's important that you make things fun, actually. I mean, particularly when dealing with children. I mean, I've run various activities with school kids and Cub Scouts and things like that on recycling. I'd say don't underestimate young people. They're incredibly switched on, actually, to how to recycle and environmental issues, more so than perhaps we realise. But by making things fun, then people want to get involved in it. And so we used games. When talking to, say, people at events and so forth. I mean, I was part of a campaign to reduce food waste in Surrey, but when I was living back in Surrey, and we were handing out recipe cards and things like that. So people who really weren't interested in climate change and recycling and so forth, we just got to our stall through handing out recipe cards, and then you could engage them. So it's building in those incentives and making it fun, really, and meaningful to people. Is key to engaging them. Yeah. The other thing I would say, is really useful to share ideas on what works. I mean, in Church Stretton at the moment, I'm part of Stretton Climate Care and also SCAP as well, but we're involved in setting up a repair cafe, and we've just taken an off-the-shelf toolkit which Di Lyle and Lorraine Walmsley put together. It's all documented, it's all there, we've got all the forms, etc. And we've had a lot of interest in the community as well. It comes back to this sort of people's awareness, because there's a programme on about repairing things on the TV at the moment. Suddenly people are very interested in repairing things, and we've had a lot of people volunteer to be repairers already. So it looks like we'll be able to set that up. But we were able to do that very easily because we were able to just take a toolkit off the shelf and start using it from day one. So I think sharing what works, really important.
Yeah,
it's good to hear that precedent, that toolkit was really, really helpful to the Church Stretton group. That's reassuring.
Absolutely.
Alison, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to say something about schools, coming back to what Becky was saying, because Lightfoot, we've worked quite a lot with Bishop's Castle Community College on various kind of woodlands projects, and we're now in our 4th year, and it is incredibly difficult to engage with schools as a community group because they're so busy. It is hard to actually get a foot in the door, particularly in secondary schools, I would say. And so, you know, there are great difficulties in actually getting your foot in the door, even though they're keen and the head is keen. So I'm just very aware of that, because we'd really like to spread our activity out to the other secondary schools in the area. But you know, you need a timetable slot, and in secondary school that's quite hard to find.
You've got to be speaking to the months before you want to do what you're doing.
And to the head. David.
Just quickly, I think most schools have got a PHSE slot, and one of the issues they have is coming up with a program of events to fill that timetable slot. And I think most schools have still got that. So if you're able to go along and say, oh, we can run some of your PHSE sessions for you, then you know, people will bite your hands off. And I've certainly found in the past that we've got into schools because they're desperate to sort of fill those slots, essentially. So that's
a good tip. Tony, sorry, I was just going to bring Tony in.
I'd like to mention that groups are starting to consider their events for the summer and the autumn, and 2 in South Shropshire that are coming up. The Ludlow 21 are hoping to do their Green Festival in July, and the Church Stretton Climate Care have got a low carbon day in October. And I think the message is going to start to come out from those events this year, that climate change is an issue. And I think if that's going to be happening across the whole of Shropshire, and possibly the whole country, everybody's going to be talking about it.
So if I can just turn that on its head, please, Tony, if I could. Who do we want to hear that message? Who do we actually want to start saying, yeah, that's the point? So we've said schools. I mean, what about local councils, local WIs? I mean, are there any groups that you feel that we're having events, we want to get the message out there? Who should we be approaching and saying, you know, trying to get a foot in the door, as Alison put it?
I think your report lists a whole load of organisations that are involved in each of those working areas, and the WI does have action for climate change. They have taken that up, and they're working with the National Trust to help do events across the country. What I think it is when you have an event in your town centre or your local village, you attract people who already know. What you've then got to do is try and outreach beyond those people.
Absolutely.
And it's spreading the message. It's difficult, but I think what I'm trying to point out is the conversation over the next 6 months is going to increase. So we have an opportunity to spread that message. The newspapers are now full of energy and environmental issues, much more than they used to be. Programs on television are covering the topic much more than they used to be. So the conversation is there. We just have to join that conversation, talk to our neighbours, find out what the local issues are. And litter, as you've already said, does bring out a lot of people that don't normally engage.
That's right. And oh, Alison, sorry.
Just to say, I mean, I think what we also need, apart from the events, the local events do tend to bring the people who are already tuned in. There's going to be one in Clun on the 18th of September. But I do think that to follow it up, we need something like a helpline. You know, I don't know if it could be a Shropshire-wide helpline. I know the MEA have one, but it's mostly directed towards fuel poverty, so it's quite specific. But a climate helpline, you know, that was county-wide, that was manned by, you know, trained volunteers. I mean, a lot of us could probably do it with a bit of help. Would be just something that so somebody could ring up and say, look, I want, you know, I want a house survey. Oh, do you do one perhaps you do one, Tony, and perhaps the Shropshire Green Exchange already does one. But I mean, I think something like that would be just such a help, because then when people think, well, what can I do? They've got someone to ring and speak to.
If I may come in there, Alison.
Yeah.
Local groups like Streatham Climate Care put posters around the town, they put their contact details, and they do have conversations with a large number of people. What I think is possibly interesting is the idea that there's going to be a community hub in each area that will be helped by the local council and Shropshire Council to be an information point, so that people can go in, they can ask, and there will be information available. And I know the Shropshire Council want to encourage this.
Yeah, there's going to be one in Bishop's Castle. We've already started to put it together.
Or the local library or someone like that can act as a community hub, and that therefore would fill the role of a contact.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. I am going to move us on now because I'm conscious of time galloping away. But before I do that, I just want to mention a very local example here, which is the supported living accommodation, used to be known as sheltered housing, just around the corner from me. And it's little bungalows where the housing association that runs them, now known as Connexus, retrofitted ground source heat pumps. Now, I was involved in the negotiations or the consultation with the tenants, and the tenants weren't in the, I'm saying this without wanting to sound too kind of dismissive of their views, but the tenants were not in the least bit interested that this was something that the housing association was doing because of climate change. They honestly did not give a damn about that, most of them. What really mattered to them and what we found excited them was when they knew they'd be saving money and that the operating system would be simple to use. And it's worked so well and they're really pleased with it. So although individuals can take action, I think sometimes an organisation has also got to step in and say, look, you know, we're doing this for your own good and it will benefit you, honestly, you know. So it's, you don't want to be patronising with people, but it is getting that balance of how do you get people to care about something or to accept that something is the best way forward. So,
and there's quite, just very briefly, there's quite a lot of talk at the moment about the fact that housing associations are really the best people to put in some of these measures, because they can afford to put in slightly experimental measures, whereas individuals are taking the cost on themselves, you know, and obviously it would only be some individuals who could do that. And I hope that housing associations are going to lead with retrofitting and the sustainable heating, but they do seem to be a little bit in Shropshire anyway with Connexus. Yeah.
Well, they're not as good as they were, but that's another story. I won't go there.
Yeah.
Just moving us on now, we want to talk about putting ideas into action. And as David has already very rightly said, activities have to be fun. They've got to be interesting. They've got to feel like a job worth done, well done. Otherwise, people just get turned off by it. So what I want people to do, please, and you can either, I think that we're a small enough group for you to actually just speak out rather than putting it into chat. Starting with what are the easiest two things that could happen in your community to make a difference? If you could all just think of a couple of easy wins, please, and share them with us. Who wants to go first?
Well, I can start. I'll start. I'll just start quickly. The litter pick. I mean, I have to say we've already started it in Clun, so perhaps it's not. Perhaps I should be thinking of things we could do. But the litter pick, you know, is quite easy to organise. It needs one person to organise it, who's actually Dave Tomlinson, who does it. It needs a very small amount of not very expensive equipment, and we just meet once a month in the car park, and we just get spread out to various roads. And we've actually linked up with Newcastle and Clun and Clunbury. So, you know, it's only been going a few months, but it seems to be something that we can do fairly regularly. And the nice thing about it is that people see people that they know picking up litter along the roads. So that's got to be, you know, there's lots of messages there apart from actually doing the litter pick. And then the other thing that we're having slightly more, that we are trying to get off the ground is to do areas of wildflowers, looking at what we've got using the Nature Recovery Network ideas, looking at the biodiversity in the area, and we're just sort of trying to get that off the ground, and also looking at Clun Castle, which is quite an interesting site. So that gets perhaps a different group of people. So those are just two things so far.
Yeah, and Tony gave an example earlier on of Bishop's Castle with their no single-use plastic campaign. So anybody got any more examples? I have actually got a whole list here which I could go through, but Richard.
Well, I was going to say litter picking myself, because there is already a group in Ludlow, but I think it needs to be focused now, having seen litter picking recently and when we last lived here about 4 or 5 years ago, attracting very, very few people, although it does seem to have increased a little bit since last time we were here. But really more focused on local areas within the town itself, because you can go up to some areas of Ludlow which are pretty filthy and nobody doing anything about it. We tend to concentrate on the centre and just radiating out from the centre for a couple of hours, and that's it, you all go home. There's not much activity beyond that, rather than getting together a little bit afterwards. But I think if there was like a local groups that could concentrate on, say, you go into that, or if there was somebody that could coordinate it, do that area, this area, that area, just to focus on the
street champions.
Having
an area of street
like
champion,
almost like the American sort of a doctor highway or something like that. You adopt a street in your own town, just keep it nice.
It's a great idea. And if I could just give another example from Ludlow, I'm not from Ludlow myself, but I do work for Hands Together Ludlow, and what they've been doing is reducing food waste by taking surplus food from the supermarkets, cooking it up into good hot meals, healthy food, and delivering it to people at a very it is at cost that it's delivered, and anything they can't use, they freeze the meals and then take them out when they're needed. So that's a good Ludlow example. Tony.
Well, that's okay. I was just going to say, I'm involved with that because I'm one of the food deliverers. So.
Well done, Richard. Tony.
One organisation I'll mention is the Shropshire Community Charity, which is based in Craven Arms. I don't know.
I don't know that. Tell us more. I've not come across that one.
It's been established for a long time now. I can't remember when it first started, but they do help with mobility for people in the rural areas. They got energy advice. They deal with fuel poverty and food poverty. So if you look up Shropshire Community Charity, the SRC.
Right, I will. Tony.
There's a woman called Julia Barron who's very much.
Oh, I know Julia Barron. Yeah.
She's very much involved with that organisation, and they have lots of contacts with people in South Shropshire, so it'd be worth having a look at them.
Yes, I'll contact Daphne, because I think Daphne Simmons has some links with that group. Yeah. So
Can I make a suggestion? Can people who haven't spoken, who are in the group, like possibly Dennis, and there's a lady in the group who her name isn't up, but I can see you there. Do they want to contribute something to these easy wins? Oh, Mary Hopkins and Dennis Twist, do you have some ideas about easy wins, easy solutions?
I don't have any easy wins.
No.
Quite the reverse. I'd like to make the point that many steps which people can take to reduce their carbon footprint makes them worse off or less convenient. For example, everybody could undertake to buy their electricity from a fully green supplier.
Yeah.
That's going to cost them money in most cases. Why should they do it? The only benefit is really to other people, and particularly their children and grandchildren. That's a good selling point.
that's a very good point, Dennis, and actually leads us into the last part of our session, which is, well, we've looked at the easy wins. What would you say are the two most difficult things in your community to achieve? Anybody want to have a go at that one, saying what they think are the hardest things, the hardest challenges that we're facing here in South Shropshire?
I think this overlaps a bit with the food and farming group, but I was very struck recently. We were driving, in fact, into Mid Wales, so this was Powys, and I suddenly saw a sign just sort of flash past saying no to rewilding. And I thought that is probably farmers who are just really worried about their livelihoods. And it comes back to this whole point about trying to start at the grassroots with individuals and with their concerns, and particularly their financial concerns, and trying to find a meeting point somewhere that, you know, because they hear about rewilding and they just think that means my job and everything I stand for goes out the window. So we've got to avoid the kind of slogans that put people off.
I think that is such an important point, because one of the things I feel very strongly about, and when Drew said in his little presentation for young people, from a young person's perspective earlier on, you know, we don't want to horrify children, but I wonder how many parents really understand the true horror behind the breeding of those broiler chickens that they are happily sticking on their kids' plates 2 or 3 times a week. I'll shut up there, otherwise I'll go on to a real rant. Somebody else had their hand up, I think it was Barry.
Yes. Your question is a good one, but what's easy for one person or one group might be difficult for another group, and it depends. Therefore, the toughest thing that I think for any voluntary organisation or people is to identify their own capability, because we've all got skills in certain areas, and there are terrifically talented people in Shropshire. The people that are talented don't actually boast about it or wear it on their sleeve. But if you can identify the capacity of people to bring about change in climate, then what's easier for them is to invite them to do something. What's difficult is finding them in the first place, or developing people who are interested in becoming skillful in what's needed, because all of the changes which are going to be made, if they were easy, we would have done them already. We've got to find a way of building on the capacity that we've got, and I think we are more talented than we think we are. We just don't harness it.
It's a good point, Barry. Now we've got just over a minute. last opportunity to talk about one of the real difficult challenges. Tony.
I think we've all made a good step towards achieving our aim. Getting there is going to be a lot of hard work, and I think we need to recognise that it's going to take time. We aren't going to do it overnight.
And we need to have an infrastructure approach as well. I mean, we were talking earlier in one of the sessions about transport in Shropshire, weren't we? And as individuals, other than saying we'll walk or cycle everywhere, what can an individual like me do about the absolutely appalling lack of public transport links in Shropshire? Alison.
Yeah. You know, the only thing an individual can do is lobby Shropshire Council, you know, really. But I was just going to say, you know, that after this conference is over, we need to sort of come up with a different sort of plan. And actually this group is quite an interesting group because, you know, you come from all sorts of different places. So I'm hoping that, you know, when we follow up the conference, that we will form some kind of group to try to spread out, as we said, into communities that basically aren't interested in climate, and with strategy. Hello, everybody. Oh, is this the group? Just 6 of us?
Hi.
Hello. Is someone going to volunteer to be the scribe? I think that's what we've got to do first, isn't it? Is it?
I'm not a good typist.
I can do it. I think it's recording as well.
Yeah. Does someone want to say what we're aiming to do? Sorry, I kind of slightly missed the first bit. I assumed there was going to be something up that will guide us.
Yeah, I thought there'd be a list or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can anyone remember what it is we're supposed to be focusing on?
I had a phone call, so I missed it. Sorry.
Is it in the chat? Oh no, there's nothing in.
No.
Oh, hang on, there is. Is it in the chat?
Well, it was looking at good practice, was it? That was one thing, but I'm sure there was another, you know, what could we do? It was about what can we do, was it?
Yeah, and what we could take forward, I thought.
What we could take forward. Okay.
Yeah, because that doesn't seem to be in the chat. It says there's a thing to fill in your ideas, the form. But yeah.
Well, we could have an informal discussion about what we think we should take forward, couldn't we? It's really interesting to see. I haven't met some of you, so that's really nice to see you all. Any ideas? I mean, for me, it's the whole area of the youth engagement that has come over as being quite important as schools and education and out of school. It's how to do it. I think is quite an important question. Has anyone got any ideas about? I mean, for me, I think that's terribly important and really difficult to link up.
Yeah, I was just in the breakout room with the schools group, and also I've already been in quite a few of the schools meetings, so I think there's definitely a movement there. And I think now that we're in communication with certain heads of different schools, we might be able to see some more progress in that area. And I think it's tricky because, you know, like I said, I'm from Church Stretton and I don't really know anyone else that cares, as in my age bracket. So I think it's quite there's quite a misconception of, you know, youth fighting for it and older generations not. And I have very much the flip. I have the opposite perception in Church Stretton anyway. And like I said earlier, that's why I feel like there's not to be too much emphasis or blame or responsibility on certain ages, because we're all a part of this. But there definitely needs to be a transition in what children are learning at school, because like I said, when I was at school, all I remember being taught was that cows produce methane, and that didn't mean anything to me. I just thought, okay, cows fart, that's nice, next, you know.
Or not.
Well, apparently it's their burping, but
Oh, is it
yeah, it's actually their burping. So yeah, but I think if there's enough people rallied together trying to work with the schools, because there's definitely the issue as well that teachers do care. It's not that they don't care, it's whether they have the time or the resources to make those changes. And you know, if it's not a part of the obvious curriculum, then how can they bring it into motion? And I think they need extra support, maybe from people like us, I don't know. And again, it comes down to time and money, so
sorry, shall I?
Yeah.
I suspect as well, in certain ways it's seen as political. So therefore it has to be, you know, that aspect, they have to be really, really careful, because my granddaughter is 12. She seems to be learning quite a lot on sustainability and various things, but it's very detached. The connection is not there. She knows that I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion and Christian Climate Action, but she hasn't got that connection that this is her future. And I think, as somebody said, I don't know if it was you, Rachel, or the Generation Zero people, about it's also around the fear of alarming and everything. But you know, I think that truth and action add to hope rather. You know, I think that we have to do it, but certainly I think a lot of it is seen as political, and I've heard of various heads not wanting people to come into schools because, as I said, they're afraid of being accused of being political.
Yeah, I think you're right there, because I think that there is scope in the curriculum, but it's the way it's delivered. So, I mean, I was talking to a teacher from Bishop's Castle Community College, the geography teacher, who did a whole sort of series. He did a whole sort of project on where your genes come from, you know, and it was like, you know, 30,000 miles of, you know, the brass buttons, the cotton, the dye, you know, and it became clear that just buying a pair of jeans was remarkably bad for the planet, you know, for the planet, for carbon. And then at the end he said, well, you know, what do you think then? And they all said, no, we're going to buy the designer jeans, we're not going to go to the second-hand shop, you know. I mean, but the thing is, at least he was trying to do that, and he had a slant, you know, he was obviously so I think it is possible, and but it's how you, I don't know. I think the fear is important, but it needs to be more mainstream. I'm very interested to see that there's someone, that Chrissy is from the Diocese of Hereford, because we've been in the schools group, we've been trying to contact the Diocese of Hereford to find out about their school climate, you know, focus. And maybe you're the person to find out, because of all the schools that are supported are in the Diocese of Hereford. Can you tell us anything about climate education that is being promoted? Is there anything that you can tell us?
It's down to each individual school, as you know, to you know, work out their curriculum. The only bit the diocese has influence on is in regard to the sort of governance structures and the input from the church angle, whatever that level that might be. They can't tell them what to study or how to study it. You can offer them resources, but you know, a lot of people can do that. So they're all individually, you know, working their own way through that, or groups of schools are, if they're in a group. So it's really difficult. I have no, you know, I work for the diocese, but I have no access into the schools, and I do stuff around modern slavery and all sorts of other topics which would be very relevant into the schools. But because the curriculum is so packed and busy, they haven't got capacity to even look there, particularly post-COVID, I think, at the moment.
I mean, you have got lines of communication with the school, I suppose, that we might not have. So there are.
Personally, I don't. The
No,
education
not personally.
department.
No, not
Yeah.
personally.
No, education department has, yeah.
So anyway, we need to make contact with them because there possibly are ways. If you go into, there are always people in schools who are doing the curriculum, who are organising the curriculum across and throughout, aren't there? And it's kind of in there that you need to get. And
they have bulletins that go out and things like that. Information can be shared, I'm sure, but yeah.
Because it's sort of going into it that way, rather than coming in as a community group, it would be so much more useful, you know, going in from the diocese or from the council. And we have talked to Sam Kirby-Bray, who hasn't actually managed to get to the conference today, who is at Shropshire Council, and he's very interested in the whole sort of schools and education climate problem. And you know, I think that maybe there could be a sort of joining up over Shropshire with the people who, you know, with the climate interests in education, to try to sort of feed this more strongly into schools. And so the diocese would be really important in that. Anyway, that's just an idea about schools. There's probably lots of other things that we want to talk about as well, but it is just very difficult to do. It's the how that is so hard. So any other ideas about how we can get to people who aren't on board, basically, with doing something about climate?
Dennis? Yeah, Dennis.
Dennis, you're on.
Yeah, what you just said, Alison, I think is very important. How you get the message to other people. We actually can't do anything ourselves. We can't change anything because we don't have any money, we don't have any power. It's all up to governments, really. I don't believe that anybody can actually achieve, other than government, could achieve net zero by 2030. A government could do it if it were armed with wartime powers, which they haven't. They have no sign of looking for.
Or pandemic powers.
That was my question to Philip.
As Philip Dunn said,
Yeah.
it's very, very difficult to get things done by government. And they won't do anything, governments won't do anything until they feel there is sufficient support from the population.
Dennis, I think though that there is an individual contribution that people could make by the choices they make and the products they buy, the way they transport themselves, the house they live in, that, you know, each person individually does make up the problem, really.
Yeah,
It's not all about government, you know what I mean?
No, it isn't. I mean, the thing is, governments will only do what they have to do, and the COVID crisis shows that they will do it. If they have to do it, they'll do it. And I mean, I think that's the example that we have to sort of build on, that if they feel that it's urgent enough, they will do it. And, you know, we've all been made to live in a completely different way because of COVID, and some people haven't wanted to do it, but they've had to do it. So that's the model, isn't it? That it becomes urgent enough. And that's why Extinction Rebellion is brilliant, because it's probably politically unpopular, but there you go. You know, I think it's moved things on. Jill.
Well, I was just thinking also, of course, Extinction Rebellion's citizens' assemblies. I mean, they're a way forward as well, but because the government doesn't like those, because they see it as diluting democracy. But in fact, I see it as increasing democracy because it pushes it down to the ordinary person. And we've noted in the few high-profile court cases there have been lately, where they've gone to, you know, to jury trial, that the juries have in fact found the defendants not guilty. So the general, when I just think we have to trust the general public, when they're given the truth, they tend to make the decisions we would, you know, we like. But it's it's, I don't know, it's, but I mean, politically, don't we have to try and persuade all the other parties to act together to, I'm not sorry to say it, but to defeat this government? But of course, that'll be another so many years.
I mean,
but,
the Citizens UK type model, which they tend to have in cities rather than in the rural areas like us, is holding power to account, because it is about, you know, people expressing what they want in a sufficient number, and they vote, you know, it's quite democratic. They vote for the issues they want to follow, and then they have asks of politicians and local government and whoever else, and then they hold them to account. So there are ways forward that can help, but it's harder to manage in a big rural county like this.
It's also, for me, it's a big issue because the parties of the left, which are actually most of the other parties, are completely divided. They're not together. So the Lib Dems and the Greens and the Labour, you know, they've all got good climate strategies, you know, in their manifestos. But because they're divided, they never do any good. So in my view, there should be a sort of an alliance of the left. But that's, you know, that's a long time. Whether that will come before the next election, it just is totally frustrating, the system we've got with, I suppose PR might help a little bit, but you know.
Well, then they could introduce PR and could then go back to organising their separate parties if they wanted to.
Yes.
But just form the alliance to get rid of this government and introduce PR.
Yeah, but the only way you can do that, you know, actually on the ground, is by only having one left candidate in a constituency. And that's really difficult for people to, I mean, it would mean that in Shropshire, we would all have to, or in South Shropshire, we'd all have to agree to have just one, say a Lib Dem, and we'd all vote for the Lib Dem, not the Green, not the Labour, you know, not, I mean, we would have to agree to do that. And that's hard for us because we're all tribal.
Yeah, but you would
I'm not even sure though that would even be enough though, because I looked at the local election result, and the winner was by quite some margin, even more than all the others combined. So,
but it was a reduced vote.
How do you defeat that?
It's a very good model though, isn't it? Yeah, and I think that Philip Dunn got 16,000 and all the rest together got about 14,000. I think I did look at it once, but it's a good model and it could be used in other constituencies, and it would work in a lot of constituencies to oust the Conservative. Oh, I shouldn't really say that. We shouldn't really be doing this on this, but you know, sorry.
I don't
take it back. Take it back.
Dennis?
This bit might have to be deleted from the record.
Oh dear. Well, it's just a point about how do we actually get it done? I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? Because,
well, I even think, going back to the importance of schooling and education about climate change, I think there's also a huge issue with young people not voting. So again, trying not to make it political, but there's a political side to it, and if we don't have young people voting, which just frustrates me, but it's like there's a problem there as well that I think schools should be held accountable for, because again, I came out of school not knowing anything about politics, not knowing the importance of voting. I did, just because of who I am as a person and the kind of people I'm around, and I very quickly realized this is important. I want to vote, and I was so excited to vote and got my heart broken. But I think, again, I'm still seeing people around I mean, I'm 23, but from age 18 to 23, I'm seeing people that either on the first vote, because we were more open at that age, we didn't realize how controversial it was, and be like, who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? So, you know, not realizing you shouldn't really ask that, but and everyone just being like, oh, I'm voting Conservative because my parents do, and I can't blame them for that way of thinking, because at the age of 18 you are still a child.
I can blame them. Why don't they open their eyes?
I know, but I mean, I just think it's quite human as a young person to copy your parents who you look up to, but again, that's where I think schools should be showing them you should have your own thoughts, your own voice, your own opinion. It's okay if you don't agree with your close friends and family. oh, we're going to be leaving in a second, but yeah, so I think as well as trying to get climate into schools, I think things like politics and that voting should be there as well.
So we've been talking about level. What about some of the grassroots up stuff that, you know, this conference is about that as well. And we can do things like in Manchester, they got a cooperative to do retrofitting and apply for grants, help retrofit houses. You know,
it's all in there. It's all in there. There's
yeah, that's right. So we can find other ways of, from grassroots up, showing the government and the local authority, this is what our people want and this is what we are planning to do. So let's join in with us. So we can find ways like that.